Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Redlands Camera Club. This evening's presentation is from Thibault Roland and originally from France. Thibault learned film photography as a teen. He became serious about photography in 2009 as he was finishing his PhD in physics. He is a professional fine art photographer and educator specializing in black and white photography with a preference for landscapes, seascapes, and architecture. His background in optics and the rigorous scientific approach that he learned along the years have allowed him to experiment and carefully build his portfolio of techniques with the goal to create images that are both unique and poetic. So with that, Tylen, Tybolt, thank you for being here with us and sharing with us your portfolio techniques. I'm very much looking forward to your presentation, and the floor is yours.
For having me. Can you guys hear me okay and see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah,
You're a little soft. If you can talk a
little
little bit
soft.
louder.
Okay, how about now? Is
Much
this
better.
helping?
Thank you.
Better.
Yep.
Okay. All right, cool. Okay, so yeah, I'm super excited. Thank you so much for having me. I will be talking today about some of the stuff that I like, that I love the most. Minimalism, which is going to touch upon some of the other things that I love the most. Some of the really cool techniques that photography, allows us to use. So, but I'll jump into that a little bit later. So, um, this is basically what I'm going to be talking about today. I'll talk a little bit about what minimalism is, some of the foundations of minimalist photography, in my opinion, how to simplify a scene, some of the important considerations for minimalism, and what now. And what I mean by that is I'm going to show you one example of basically an image that I take from the raw file all the way to the finished file. That's going to kind of wrap up a lot of what I'm going to be talking about in the previous sections. And depending on whether we have time or not, I may touch upon a couple techniques and maybe even share a few more images. So let's jump right in. By the way, if you guys have any questions, just feel free to interrupt. Don't hesitate. That I'm very happy. I like it when it's interactive. The only thing that I will ask is if you don't have questions and don't mind, that would be great if you can mute yourselves just to make sure that, I'm not thinking that there might be a question when there's not. Um, okay, so let's talk a little bit about what minimalism is. In photography, it is a visual style that emphasizes simplicity, clarity, and intentional use of space. Rather than filling the frame with complexity, it strips an image down to its essential elements. If I dive a little bit more into this, I will say that the goal is to remove distractions and invite viewers to slow down, look closer, and to connect more deeply with the subject and themselves. And there's a number of ways that you will achieve this with this technique. The first one is that it's going to really help focus the attention on specific elements in your image, right? Because if you're stripping your images off of almost everything, whatever remains basically will be the focus of your attention. The second thing is that it brings clarity amid chaos. Um, it cuts through the visual noise. It offers clarity and focus in an era where we're constantly bombarded with images. Um, it also emphasizes and promotes emotions through interpretation. By reducing the elements that you have in your images, it will amplify emotion because viewers will be more likely to feel something when there's space for their own interpretation. Um, it also brings a time of sense, timelessness. Um, a very clean, simple composition will tend to age pretty well. that will lead through transcending trends, and it will speak to something universal and enduring. It also will promote mindfulness and intentionality. Minimalist photography encourages both the creator and viewer to be intentional, to notice light, shape, textures, and also what I like to say, silence, especially in my photography. And I know this is pretty typical, but less is more. In a culture where often more is equated to better, minimalism challenges us to ask what does really matter. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the foundations of minimalist photography. Well, and I know that it's going to sound very familiar to a lot of you, but I want to make sure that we're all on the same page and we all keep a few things in mind. This is one of them. Um, what I'm showing you here is basically a histogram. For those of you who are not familiar with histograms, what they are just representations of how bright or dark an image is. On the right-hand side, you will have all the pixels that are very bright. At the extreme right hand, it will be pure white. At the extreme left hand side will be all the black pixels. If you're familiar with Ansel Adams' zone system, it's very much tied to that. Here, I'm just showing you histograms for grayscale image, but it's exactly the same idea for color image. Just replace the gray here with green, blue, and red, and you'll have it. So on the left-hand side, you have an underexposed or low-key image, meaning that it's an image that's going to be mostly dark. On the right-hand side, you'll have an image that's going to be high key overexposed, so very bright. In the center, you have an image that's properly exposed. Well, how does that relate to minimalism? It relates to minimalism in the sense that if you decide to create an image that's going to be very dark, low key, that brings in a sense of tension and focus in your image. Whatever is bright will be the focus of that image. If you have an image that's on the other end, very much high key, that tends to bring this sense of quietness into your images. And again, kind of whatever is going to be dark will focus the attention. If you have an image that's properly exposed, it's a little bit more neutral, it's a little more cold, it doesn't really go one way or the other. But if you have an image that has very high contrast, it tends to bring this sense of energy and mystery. So this is just to kind of help build up already the sense of um, the feelings that you want to evoke in people who are going to be looking at your images, and kind of help build the stories behind those images. There is a number of core visual elements that I like to point out that will make, in a way, the secret sauce to minimalistic images. It will sound a little bit like a laundry list, but I just want to make sure that it's out there and we all think about them, because when you're in the field, trying to focus and think about all these different elements and how you can include them, exclude them, and focus on certain of them will really help, um, you know, create more interesting images. And the first element that I want to point out is shapes, right? Like you can create images where the focus is going to be the shapes in those images. Um, and you can, but you don't have to mix that up with some other core elements. For instance, textures and patterns or breaks in patterns. I think that images that you would create that um, rely on textures and patterns can be very, very strong and very effective minimalist images, like you see these two here. On the right-hand side, you kind of see those patterns of the rolling hills all around, and you have the break in the pattern, which is this one single tree in the middle of that area, and that really, really helps focus the attention there. Another thing that I want to make sure we are all keeping in mind is the relationship to space. And there's a couple different ways that I'm going to break that up. The first one here is that depending on the focal length of the lenses that you're going to be using, that will help, bring the attention or de-emphasize certain elements. What I mean by that is if you're using a lens that's kind of a mid-range, um, everything is a little bit more neutral in a way. If you use a lens that's much more wide angle lens, like you can see on the right-hand side, um, you can't really tell from the image, and this is what I actually wanted in this particular image, but the rocks in the foreground are way smaller than the big rock in the distance. But because I used such a wide angle lens, it really allowed me to emphasize the rocks in the foreground, which in turn allowed me to kind of really create this um, discussion, this story between those rocks in the foreground and the one in the background, and to emphasize this leading line that starts between the foreground and ends, with this arch over there. Colors are great ways to also, how to say, create minimalist images or to help you push images into the realm of minimalism. And what I mean by that is when you use opposite colors or colors that will stand out, like you have this kind of yellow standing out against the blue. That's a great way to, focus the attention on this one subject that's standing out because of that color contrast. And then, just use a little bit more magic, a little bit more of the things that I'm going to talk about, and you're really going to get into that realm of minimalism. Now, obviously, the thing to keep in mind is also whether you want to keep colors altogether in your images or not. Sometimes colors can be distracting. Sometimes colors can take away from where you want people to focus. So it can be a good idea to strip away your images of their colors, and obviously, this is not the only thing that I did in this one, but that really helped, um, how to say, make those silos stand out from the image. And talking about black and white, I just want to spend maybe 5 minutes on that. I have a whole presentation, a whole 1 hour presentation on black and white alone, so I'm not going to dive too much into it, but I just want to bring up a couple um, things that I think are very important with black and white. Um, this is not a very interesting image, but it's an image that really illustrates what I'm going to say, which is that sometimes converting images to black and white might work against you. And it might work against you depending on how you do that black and white conversion. Here, what I did was a pure desaturation of my color image. You can see in the color image, I have this kind of strong, quote unquote, leading line, right? With this very strong color contrast in the center. And on the right-hand side, when I desaturated my image, it's completely gone, right? So I'm completely removing that information. It's really working against me. However, if I do this a little bit in a smarter way, I can retain that information. And even further than that, um, again, not a very interesting image, but just to illustrate that when you have color contrast, what's great about black and white is that when you don't just desaturate, which is like what you're seeing here, but tweak it, you can actually tweak it in a way where now you're going to be the one deciding what the contrasts are going to be and what the final result of your black and white image is going to be. You can go either way, with those images that you see at the bottom. And if I now illustrate this with one of my images, so before, I guess I just wanted to mention that this is a great way to step away from reality and from the subject that you're capturing. It's a gateway into photography, and it's really a way for you to be um, basically showing your personal vision, which is going to be different from someone else's in your final image. But now, if I'm actually applying this to my own work, this is an image that I captured, in Eastern Washington, the Palouse area, if you guys are familiar with it, where I do some workshops pretty much every year. I love it. It's got tons of different subjects there. And one of the subjects basically is wind turbines. Um, this is an image of one of those wind turbines that I shot basically handheld. It's a very, very fast shutter speed, but I love to use a technique that's called long exposure. I'll talk a little bit more about it later, but I just, without going into more details right now, these are different versions of that one long exposure image that you see on the left-hand side, how I can now really basically decide which way I'm going to go with black and white, right? I can decide to go with a very high key image, which is what you have in the center. It's a little bit more quiet, a little bit more zen, or I can go very, very contrasty with emphasizing tension on the right hand side. And I'm the one deciding this as I'm doing the black and white conversion, right? Again, what you may decide might be different from what I'll decide here. But what I love about black and white is that it it frees me from sticking to reality, and now I can really create something that's going to be different. So how would you simplify a scene? Well, again, it's going to sound a little bit like a laundry list, but there's a number of different things that I think are worth keeping in mind when you find yourself in the field in front of a subject that maybe, you know, might give you different options, and some of them might be a little bit more complex than others. Well, first of all, you can basically decide that you're going to use a very simple composition. I'm not saying that the image on the left-hand side here doesn't work. I think it totally works, but stack in the
Yeah.
background, which, by the way, as a side note, I don't know if any of you guys know Oregon or not, but this is in Bendon, Oregon. It's called Face Rock. I think you might be able to figure out why. Um, but if like move a little bit further one way, you might be able to step away from those cliffs and get, that subject isolated nicely so that now it's going to be just a story about that one rock. Um, there's a whole story, a whole legend about how this is a princess who's basically trying to find her fiance or something like this in the ocean. It's a native legend, but it's pretty cool. So the other thing that I think is extremely important when it comes to minimalism is to be aware of this concept, which is called negative space, and how you can use it and how you should use it, in my opinion, intentionally. Intentionally, you want to. So the concept of negative space is just basically this kind of fancy way to say that there's a whole bunch of nothing in an image, and whatever is left is going to attract the attention on it. But you want to do this intentionally. You want to make sure that you're leaving enough of that space around the subject so that that subject doesn't look like it's placed in a way that doesn't really work, that was not intentional, because you didn't really have a choice when you were creating this image or anything like this. Every time that there's something that screams unintentional to me, I think needs to be thought through some more and see if you can fix it in a way. See if you can um, make it so that people can see, oh yeah, that tree is placed in the dead center. This is what the maker of that image wanted to do. Oh, that tree is placed in the third in that image. This is intentional because if you place it kind of in the third, but not quite in the third, it speaks more for, you not really having a choice into the making of this image. Um, a great tool to promote minimalism a wide aperture, or you can actually use specialty lenses. This is a tilt shift lens, but there are other lenses such as lens babies and whatnot that really allow you to put the focus, or you could even just do this in editing to a certain extent. You can put the focus on a specific area in your image. And again, this speaks for intentionality. And now everything that is blurred out basically helps, um, how to say, it helps with, um, sorry, I just lost my thought of train of thought. Something happened on the computer here, and that distracted me. I'm sorry. Um, yeah. Anyways, I'm gonna keep going. The other thing that will help you with subject isolation could be to use, weather patterns to your advantage. Here you have this really cool bridge that's located in Astoria in Oregon. I came back another day that was very, very foggy, and now you could see how that bridge just disappears in the distance. You can't see the other side. You can see the Washington State in the background, and it's now making this really cool bridge that goes to nowhere. It's highly minimalistic in this case. Um, I did hear that you guys apparently are going to have a lecture or a workshop or something along those lines on intentional camera movement. So I'm not going to speak too long about it, but this is also a great way to simplify a complex scene. On the left-hand side, you have a forest. What I did was move my camera up and down as I was using a very slow shutter speed that basically blurred out the trees. On the right-hand side, I also used the vertical movement to blur out, but this time uh, buildings. Of course, I did this vertically in these two examples, but there's no reason why you would stick to doing it vertically. You could go to, the beach and do it horizontally or do it in any direction that might actually fit the scene that you're capturing. Now, this is kind of the answer to the question earlier, which was why would you want to use a tripod? Well, you might want to use a tripod because there's this really cool technique that's called long exposure. The image on the left-hand side does not use the technique of long exposure. This is a very fast shutter speed. You can see how all those elements are very sharp, including the waves on the ocean. As a side note, um, this is a sculpture that's located in the southwest of France. Don't ask me the story behind the sculpture. I don't know what it is. I just knew it existed. I knew I wanted to go there someday. It took me a few years to get there, but I finally did. And I was so excited about it because really what I wanted was to kind of emphasize that structure coming out of the water, so that it was going to be very easy to focus on it to the point that it might actually almost look like, the skeleton of the snake is coming at you. So to do that, I used what's called long exposure, which basically uses a very, very slow shutter speed. I don't know if I'm going to have time to talk about it later today, but if I don't, just know that I use what's called a neutral density filter that basically acts just like your sunglasses would. It cuts out a lot of the light that goes through and that gets captured by your camera, which means that it needs a slower shutter speed. In this particular case, I used almost well, actually, I did use a 4 minute long exposure. What happened is that the water ended up being super flat. The clouds ended up moving and creating those really cool streaks. And there was absolutely no way that I could do this without a tripod, like no way using long exposure. You could do tricks like using a series of images and averaging them out, but some weird things could happen in these cases. So I would recommend using the long exposure, but it is possible. I'm going to show you two more examples of using that technique of long exposure, because there are other reasons why you might want to use this technique. You might find yourself in locations where you're going to have a lot of people, just walking around, um, doing their business, maybe just visiting this really cool spot. Um, and unfortunately, there's not really any way for you most of the time to be alone in these places and take pictures of those places alone. I don't know about you, but I'm a photographer. I would love to be able to take pictures of those places without people taking selfies of themselves or and whatnot, right? Um, well, again, if you use the technique of long exposure, now you can actually completely make those people disappear depending on how long you're going to be shooting for. You have about the same amount of time that I captured the two images at the bottom. The main difference was that on the left-hand side, people tended to stay sitting and not moving very much. On the right-hand side, people were just moving around, which means that on the right-hand side, um, the shipwreck, I was able to completely make people disappear. Unfortunately, on the left-hand side, I'm sorry, because people were just standing there, not moving. During that about same time, 4 minutes, they actually were still there, and I could still see their silhouettes. Much less than before, obviously, but I can still see them. In this particular case, I actually kind of like seeing those silhouettes. I think it kind of brings something more to the image. But if I decided to use an even slower shutter speed, I could have made them completely disappear. So again, there's no way you can actually hold a camera still for 4 minutes, um, and have an image that's going to be sharp. not nowadays. In the future, with AI, who knows? Maybe, I don't know, but not today. Okay. Another way to simplify a complex scene, which may, not be super complex to start with, but is to use editing. And I know that sometimes I can take editing a little bit to the extreme. I don't do that necessarily very often, but you will see a kind of extreme result of my editing on the right-hand side. I decided that I didn't like the roof of the building the way it was. I decided that I didn't quite like some of the windows the way they were showing. So I decided that I would be basically tweaking all of that stuff, and I would be adding a really cool shadow on the front of the building just to make it more realistic. And as you can see now, it's like this, how to say, emphasized minimalist image there. Now, there are a few important considerations that I think we need to keep in mind for minimalism. The first one is aspect ratio is going to be super important, um, especially when you keep in mind negative space, right? I'm not saying that you should be sticking to an aspect ratio in particular. I'm just saying that there are some that are going to be a little bit more, how to say, appropriate than others. Um, a panorama picture where you have a single object in the third one side, I think works fantastic. I personally am very much in favor of square format because, I learned on um, 6x6. I loved the kind of rigidity of it, but also because it taught me to play with symmetries, with diagonals, with placement and compositions, and I love that. But you can also use, 4:3 aspect ratio and make it work great. Rule of thirds, I'm sure all of you have heard of it before, probably have used it. I think it's a great rule to follow. It's also a great rule to learn to step away from as well. It's great because it allows you to either off balance or, on the contrary, emphasize the balance of an image, make it more dynamic. If you have, two objects, one third from the left, one third from the right, they tend to kind of like talk to each other and balance each other out. Uh, there's a lot of different things you can do with the rule of thirds, just like what you're seeing in these images here. Again, on the left-hand side, everything is super symmetrical, but I'm still using the rule of thirds. Talking about symmetry, it's a great way to create clean and balanced compositions. And it's a great way to emphasize this balance feeling of, quietness when you're actually also using a high key rendering of your image like you see on the right hand side. We talked about intentionally intentionality. Well, this is a great example of what I mean by I think how it will help creating better images by being intentional. Here you see my raw picture on the left-hand side. You can see how it's not quite centered. It's close, but it's not quite centered. It doesn't really speak for intentionality here. However, if now I crop it, I recompose it, I make it so that it's really symmetrical, this is intentional. This lifts this tension that I see on the left-hand side. At least, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I see the image on the left-hand side kind of builds tension a little bit for me. On the other hand, if you actually purposefully offset those, rocks to the side, again, that speaks for intentionality. I'm totally fine with that. What I personally would go with is actually that square format here. Again, intentionality. So we spoke about placing elements with intention. I think that the edge should also be placed with intention. You see on the top left-hand corner how I have on the left-hand side of the image very, very small, how to say, space. While on the right-hand side, I have a whole lot of space. It speaks for intentionality, but it's completely off balanced here. Bottom left-hand corner, I don't have quite as much space on, either on the left or the right-hand side. It speaks also for intentionality, but because I don't have that much space on the edges, um, it builds tension again. It feels very crammed in my frame. For specifically, well, in the framework specifically of minimalism, my recommendation, the way I would do it is actually what you see on the right-hand side. I would give it a lot of breathing room on the left-hand side and the right-hand side, just to kind of emphasize this sense of isolation, um, how small those objects look, almost fragile in a way in that frame, like kind of crushed by the elements, by um, um, the wind that's blowing on them, the water that's splashing on them. So what now? How do I use all these different elements, of the secret sauce to creating images? Well, I like to share the story behind this image because this is a spot that I like to take people when I go, I lead my North Oregon coast workshops. It's a great spot. It has many different sea stacks there. They're really, really cool. This one is kind of the smallest sea stacks of all of them. A lot of people would just dismiss it because the other ones are so much cooler. I like to actually look for these kind of outliers or those, how to say, left off subjects because I find they're really great challenges to make me a better photographer, and they make for great minimalistic images as well. So this location that I took this picture from, um, it's basically this kind of um, walkway where you can go super far to the left, super far to the right hand side, and take pictures anywhere there. When I saw this scene, I thought, huh, I really like this big rock that's kind of in the middle here. And I like the small rocks that are in the foreground. But how cool would it be that I could get those rocks to be balanced out basically from the left and the right hand side? And I don't know if you can tell, but the rocks here in the foreground, they're almost creating this kind of arrowhead that if you place it on the left hand side, it would actually be pointing at this really big rock. So I was thinking to myself, wow, that would be such a cool composition, which I could do 100% if I actually moved, 30, 50 feet to the right hand side. I could throw those small rocks on in the foreground further to the left, keep the big rock on the right hand side. However, if I did this, the jetty that you see in the background here on the left hand side would now come behind the big rock. And I don't know about you guys, but I absolutely hate those jetties. I wish they were not there. Again, I will try to do everything that I can in camera right from the start so that I've got everything in camera and I'm going to do as little in editing as possible. Sometimes it's just not possible. This is one of those times. So I knew that if I wanted to get rid of those jetties, I would have to do it in post. I knew also that if I wanted to do it in post, it would be much, much harder to get rid of those jetties if I had the big rock overlapping with either one of those two jetties. So I purposefully decided in the field that I was better off not having the composition that I wanted, but I knew that I could actually move those rocks where I wanted them to be. So create the composition that I wanted while removing those big jetties in the background. I knew I could do this. So I decided that I would basically compromise on the composition because I knew I had the skills to quote unquote fix that image in post. So if I go to talk about this or everything that I basically mentioned here, I have illustrated in the next few images there, but I thought about this whole process in my head as I was basically there in the field. And I would very much encourage you to try and get there where you can think about all these different elements in the field, because that will really help you create better images, make better choices that will later on allow you to um, get to that final image that you want to create. So again, decided I was going to get rid of those jetties. Then I didn't mention that, but I wanted to actually get a 1:2 aspect ratio. So I knew I was going to expand the edge on the left-hand side of this image, stretch it out. Then I wanted to move those rocks to the left-hand side, and I wanted to create a vignette. So this vignette is where you basically darken up the outside of the image so that the brighter area is going to be around the focus, around the main subject in your image. I also wanted to stretch out that rock a little bit just to give it a little bit more, how to say, strength in the picture. And those B's are for, okay, I want this area to be brighter, and these D's are, okay, I want these areas to be darker. That's what I'm showing you in a way. I don't know, I'm sure some of you have captured images, on film and done contact sheets so that you knew how you wanted to print those images. This is very similar to that in a way. But again, I kind of try every time that I go in the field to think about all these different steps um, right there and then, even before I capture my images, because that will help me make these decisions and capture image so that at the end of the day, I can actually get the image that I want. And also I wanted to create a black and white version of that image, or convert it to black and white, I should say. So I'm not going to be spending too much time here because again, I have basically a 1 hour presentation kind of on editing alone. And I could be spending many, many more hours. There are so many different ways to skin a cat when it comes to editing, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of a high level view of what my workflow for editing, especially editing minimalistic images, is. So I capture images in RAW, in color, therefore, like all the time. You do not want to capture images in JPEG only, because you're going to be very limited in terms of dynamic range. You're going to start having artifacts in your images when you're editing them, all kinds of issues. I do all the global adjustments in Camera Raw. What I mean by global adjustments is that I'm going to be playing with those sliders. Those sliders will, for the most part, affect the image in its entirety. There are some ways, and I will use these to actually be a little bit more, how to say, precise in a way, to be able to adjust certain parts of my image independently from the others, kind of do a little bit of subject isolation. Nowadays, with AI, it's getting much, much, much better, but there are more often than not in my experience, situations and images where I have issues when I use those tools. Um, if I try to select the sky in an image like this, part of the ocean will also be selected and vice versa. Just because those tonalities are kind of close to each other. And so I have to be very, very careful when I use these. Some images, it works better than others, but I'm always very careful. And at the end of the day, the reason, or how to say, what's going to drive your decision whether you're okay using these tools or not is going to be by answering the question, what is the purpose of that image? Do you just want to share it with people on Facebook, in which case having like little imperfections around the horizon line might not be a big deal? Or do you want to actually share those images for, you know, contests or print them big and so on and so forth, in which case you probably want to be much more careful with how you're doing this. All these to say that when I need to be doing very precise subject isolation and and adjustments, very localized adjustments, I will do them in Photoshop. And I will put this out there too. If, in my opinion, if you want to create a good black and white image, you need to start with a good color image. It's just like a good, if you want to build a house, you want to have strong foundations, otherwise everything's going to come crashing, right? So I always start by editing my images in color, get as far as I can in color, where I'm happy with those, and then I actually will edit them in black and white. So the first thing that I mentioned was I'm going to blend the sky and the ocean. Again, I don't have enough time to really go into the details, but if you are interested, by the way, just get back in touch with me, shoot me an email, whatever. I'm happy to discuss some of these. I also do one-on-one editing sessions if you're interested. But anyways, in this particular case, what I did, I basically stretched down the sky to overlay over the jetties, and now they're gone. The next thing that I did, I changed the aspect ratio. I stretched out the canvas and my image on the left-hand side. This way, I have a 1:2 aspect ratio I'm happy with. Next thing, I move those rocks. This requires multiple steps, some of them using the, trying to remember the, what's it called? God,
Clone tool.
not the clone tool, no, oh my God.
Patch tool?
Nope.
Not the patch tool. Okay.
The,
Transform?
yes, thank you. The free transform. Yes, that's exactly what I use. And like I said, it requires multiple steps because it requires moving those rocks like kind of little by little and then overlay the rocks where they used to be with some of the water and kind of make it so that it blends very nicely. Then what I did was to adjust the tonalities. I also stretched the rock a little bit more. And at that point, I am basically ready to do my black and white conversion, right? So I did already quite a lot in color. Now, how do I do the black and white conversion? I use a plugin, a piece of software that's called Silver Effects. It's part of the now owned by DxO, but used to be called the Nick Silver, the Nick collection. It's a pack of different plugins. It looks like what you have on the right-hand side. On the left here in the green box are different presets. What I'm going to do first, I'm going to basically flip through those presets, figure out which one of those presets is the closest to what I want my final image to look like, which is what that output is going to be in the center image here. And I might play with those sliders on the right-hand side, right? Do some further adjustments. When I'm kind of happy with it, when I can't get closer with this particular version than I can to what I envision my final image to be, I will click apply. And what's going to happen is that it's going to create a layer in Photoshop. But that layer, like I said, it's close, but it's not going to be perfect. So I'm going to click back on my color image, put it back into Silver Effects, and maybe I'm going to create another layer where the rocks are going to look much better in that layer, but I know the sky, for instance, is going to look bad. That's fine, no big deal. I'm going to do this a number of times until I have all these different parts of my image where I have, one version for each layer of each one of those parts that looks good. And then I'm going to pick and choose each one of those parts, just like a puzzle, that I'm going to blend together to create that final image. So, like I said, I'm creating multiple versions of that image, and then I'm going to blend them together. And once they're blended together, they're going to be super, super close, but not perfect. Maybe here in this particular case, I don't like this image because it just looks a tad too flat. I wish there were a little bit more shadows, a little bit more details in these rocks. So I'm going to just add a little bit more there. And at that point, I'm done. This is my final image. So I get it. It's a significant workflow. It's a lot of work, but I think it's really worth it. And if you ask me to print this image, 20 by 40, 30 by 60, I have no problem with that without probably even having to upscale it. So that's basically all I have for tonight. I have a couple of workshops that are coming up. One of them actually with Santa Fe Workshop that is sold out, but I do have one in upstate, I'm sorry, not upstate, in Northern Oregon, along the coast in October. It's going to be a couple of days long. We're going to be going to capture actually some of those really cool locations for minimalism. If you guys are interested, feel free to reach out. Here's my email address if you guys have any questions. I also have some newsletters if you want to know, like from time to time, I do store lectures online in person. Some of them are free. That's where I share those. So if you want to learn about them, I would encourage you to sign up for my newsletters. But otherwise, yeah, I'm happy to take questions for you. And I have a few backup slides if you have questions on specific techniques such as long exposure. Hint, hint.
Thank you for showing us the Lightroom workflow and the Photoshop.
Of
That
course.
oftentimes we only see the final image, and it was great to see that walking through. Had a couple of questions in the chat. What kind of
Yeah.
ND filters do you use?
Okay, so ND filters. I have all kinds. Um, I'm going to tell you all the ones I have just to scare you, and then I'm going to tell you the ones I use the most. I have 3, 6, 10, 13, 15, 16. The ones I use the most. Oh, did I say I have 13? I forgot. Yes, I have 13. The ones I use the most, 13, 15, 16.
So you're really going
And
long.
oh, yeah. Yeah. I yes, I'm committed. I go minutes at a time. Um, when you capture landscape images, that's kind of the time scale that you want to shoot at to be able to get those really, really soft, cool streaks. However, if all you want to shoot, let's say, is going to be a waterfall, all you need is, say, a 10 stop filter, shoot for maybe a few seconds, 4 seconds, and that's absolutely all you will need. Unless there are people around that you want to get rid of, in which case then you're going to need to use a much slower shutter speed again, therefore a much darker density filter as well.
Let me open it up. Go ahead and unmute yourself if you have a question.
So, Thibault, what app are you using to set the timing? Is it like photo pills or is there something else that you're using?
You can use photo pills. However, in that regards, I am old school. I use a table that's just a printout. If you are interested, by the way, in getting a PDF of that table, I'm happy to send it to you. Just shoot me an email. And the reason that I use the table is because PhotoPills or any of the other apps kind of works backwards, in my opinion. Again, you want to be intentional. So you want to intentionally decide what the effect of the long exposure is going to be in your image. PhotoPills or whatever other app doesn't know if you're going to want to have streaks that are going to be very, very soft or very high contrast. It doesn't know, like what the weather conditions are. It doesn't know if within the landscape you're capturing, people are there and moving and you want to get rid of them, or if on the contrary, you want to keep them, as silhouettes. It just doesn't know. You have to be the one making that decision. And it's hard because it relies a lot on experience. And again, it's another one of those examples that I have in a 1 hour class on long exposure. But the idea is if you want to get rid of people, you probably want to shoot for about 4 minutes, if not longer. If you want to retain people, probably 30 seconds, a minute is fine. So you have to decide this. You will know based on the first image you're going to be capturing in the field how much light there is out there. You're going to be basically doing the same thing as if you were capturing film, which is meter the lights that you have out there. Now, the table is very easy for me to tell me what filter I need based on those two settings, where I want to be and where I'm at right now. PhotoPills tells me the other way around. It tells me I'm there. I'm going to be using this filter. Therefore, this is going to be my final exposure time. And I'm like, no, I don't want you to tell me what my final exposure time is because I am the one deciding this. I am the one who's going to want to get those streaks or get the people there, right? What I want to know is what filter do I need to use to get this exposure time? And again, the table tells me that. PhotoPills, you kind of can tell that, but it's a roundabout way. It's kind of enticing you to be unintentional about it when I think you really want to be intentional about it. Does that answer the question?
Oh, yes.
Okay, good.
Thibault, are you able to screen share your chart?
I have a PDF of it. So you mean like share it right now?
Yeah,
Give me 1 second.
it's okay if it's, yeah.
I need to open up another presentation. The short answer is yes, I can. I just need to get to it. Okay, right there. That's the one right here. Can you see it?
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is what I take in the field. And bonus point for the chart, it never runs out of battery. So yeah. Any more questions? Anything else I can clarify?
You
Did you
mentioned,
say
yeah,
you were, oh,
go ahead.
sorry, I was just gonna say, did you say you were gonna send us this PDF of the chart?
Shoot me an email and I will reply with a PDF. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
yeah, absolutely. And my email address,
Tybolt, I
right
have your
there.
email if you want to email it to me because we've been communicating, then I can email it out to the group.
Okay,
Yeah, that'd be great.
sure. Was there another question?
You had mentioned you had a couple more slides. This is, you said long exposure?
Yes, I do. Okay, so this is just to show you basically, actually, let me skip that. This is just another example of long exposure, how it can really, really transform a scene and improve it. Because as you can see on the top, how to say, the weather was kind of so-so. It was a little flat, didn't wasn't very interesting. But now if you use a 4 minute long exposure, I was super lucky that particular day that the clouds were basically either coming towards me or going away from me. I forgot. But they basically ended up just creating these leading lines towards the main subject in the picture. So this is something that I absolutely love about long exposure. Now, this is kind of a cheat sheet about long exposure. It's a chart that tells you on the left-hand side, you have a number of different subjects that you might want to capture, by any means not complete, right? Those are just a few examples. Each column on the right-hand side would be a different exposure time. The intersect between the line and the column basically tells you roughly what effect you're going to have by capturing this subject with this exposure time. So for instance, if you look at the ocean, um, under a second, you're still going to see waves. They may be a little bit looking a little bit different, but you'll still see those waves. If you shoot around 30 seconds, now the water is going to be mostly flat. Around a minute and more, the water is going to be completely flat and it's not going to change really drastically between 1 minute and, I don't know, whatever you can think of, an hour or whatever. Clouds, there's going to be no change if you shoot less than a second. Minimal blur up to 30 seconds. Then you're going to start seeing some contrast around a minute. Then around 4 minutes, you're going to see those soft streaks. And then it's going to be very misty, kind of almost bland, eventually when you're shooting long enough. The last line, what it shows you here is the strength of the ND filter that you need during daytime to basically achieve those different exposures, roughly. They're kind of rule of thumbs. They depend on exactly what you're shooting, what the amount of light is out there and all that stuff. But that's kind of, ballpark. Why I have this circled is because if you want to be able to achieve different results for different subjects, you're going to have, just to be clear, you will have to make compromises, but you can still make compromises and achieve different results. You want an ND filter that's going to be roughly in that area, like maybe 13 stops. If you just want to buy one filter, because those filters can get pricey. Now, filters, you really don't want to use variable filters because those filters are not going to be dark enough. They're going to create this cross-like pattern in certain conditions. They're going to create diffraction. So do not use variable filters for neutral density for long exposure. You want either plane or graduated filters, which come into two different types, either square or rectangles, or circular. And the circular, they can be screw-in or they can be magnetic. Either one of those will work. The only thing to keep in mind is that if you use circular filters, if you stack those filters, if you use filters that are pretty small diameter, you will end up seeing vignetting, meaning the rim of the filter will show in your image with very wide angle lenses. That basically works against you. You don't want to do this, so either use wider diameter filters or avoid stacking filters. If you use bigger filters, that's going to help, and also just get one set of filters and step up rings rather than having multiple sets of filters for different diameter lenses. Much, much cheaper. I definitely recommend breakthrough photography filters. In my opinion, at least out of all the different brands that I've tried, including these ones, they're the best ones. They're more expensive, but they're best. And yeah, that's basically what I have on long exposure.
Well, thank you for that bonus.
Absolutely.
I'm going to go ahead and hit stop on the recording. The accolade